What happens when mom is paying, but daughter doesn't like what mom is paying for? Welcome to the Devil's Triangle, today on the podcast.
This is the Wedding Industry Law Podcast, a podcast dedicated to wedding professionals that are just trying to keep it legal. And now, your host, Rob Shank.
Hello out there. Welcome back to the podcast. I appreciate you tuning in. If you have been digging what I've been throwing down these last few episodes, please be sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have ideas for content, be sure to shoot me an email, rob@weddingindustrylaw.com, or you can hit me up on any of those social media platforms. You get Instagram, YouTube, that kind of thing. I really love the feedback, and it's definitely great for ideas for what to cover. So I got the idea today after a client meeting, and this is one of the questions that came up, and that is, what happens when the mother is paying and the daughter is not fully in line with the decisions that mom is making, and there's disharmony between the two of them or anybody? I call it the Devil's Triangle. So we're going to kind of work our way through the legalities of that situation. Okay. So that way we don't get confused, and I'm not picking on mothers or daughters. It can be, fathers and sons, doesn't matter. But for the sake of brevity and for the sake of not confusing everyone, I'm going to refer to the person that is paying, which again is typically the mother or the father, the person that is paying as the money person. I'm going to refer to the persons getting married as the recipients. You've got a money person, and then you have a recipient. Okay? So there are two dangerous situations that you can be in. And that is, we'll cover the first one, which is what happens when only the money person has signed your contract. Only the money person's name is etched in that blue ink on your contract. When the money person and the recipients are disagreeing, who is your client? Who is your client when the money person has signed, but the recipients have not signed your contract? Typically in the law, in almost all jurisdictions, the only client that you have is the individual or individuals that have signed the contract. You owe, as a wedding professional, duties only to the person or persons that has signed the contract. In this instance, in the first hypothetical, it's the money person. So when the money person and the recipients are yelling at each other because the recipient wants Rugrats themed cupcakes and the money person wants strawberry shortcake themed cupcakes, the ultimate authority, the ultimate person that you listen to is the client. And the client is probably going to be the money person under most jurisdictions because the money person is the one that signed the client. To follow things to the logical conclusion, if you needed to sue the client in this instance, the money person, for money, it would be only the money person that would be responsible. You file a breach of contract action, you're filing it against the person that signed the contract, right? That's the money person. Unfortunately, and this is the little tiny rub in the law, in a situation where the money person has signed the contract but not the recipients, if the tables are flipped and you're the defendant, depending on what you've done, the money person can sue you and quite possibly the recipients can sue you. And the recipients can sue you even though they're not a part of the contract based on a concept in the law called third-party beneficiary. And we're not going to get into that because that can be hairy. And I think that was on a bar exam that I took. So I don't want to be reminded of that. So at the end of the day, if only the money person has signed the contract, then most likely the money person is your client. And the money person is going to be the person that you're going to need to listen to as the final word on that contract. In terms of needing to sue somebody or being sued, you will only be able to sue breach of contract wise people that are have privy to that contract, which is the money person. However, the flip side is if they're unsatisfied with, if either the money person or the recipients are unsatisfied with your work, all of them can sue you, but not vice versa. So that's the rub, and that's a bummer. The next scenario is in situations where the recipient or the recipients and the money person have signed the contract. Who's the client then if there's disharmony between the parties? And the answer is all of them. So when they're fighting with each other, but they've all signed, it's kind of like, guys, you got to make a decision. Like, I mean, you've got 3 different people telling me 3 different things. Somebody's got to come to a decision. So that can also lead to dicey situations. So there are typically 2 ways to minimize the friction that comes with money person only or money person and recipients signing the contract, and there being disharmony. Disharmony is the root of all this. If there's no disharmony, then it really doesn't matter. But we're talking about disharmony between money person and recipients. There's 2 ways to attempt to avoid that situation. The first way is to have only the recipients sign the contract, because based on the fact that you're only obligated to listen to the individual that has signed the contract. If it's the recipients, then it's all good. There's no conflict, because even though they might be yelling at each other, all right, recipients are the final say in this. The money person essentially is just the vessel by which the contract is paid by the recipients. So that wouldn't factor in at all. So that's one way to handle it, just having the recipients sign the contract. Even though the money person is paying, that has no bearing on the legal obligations of the contract. It is perfectly acceptable for a recipient with no money to sign a contract and be responsible for that contract and just pay through a third party means, the money person. So just because a credit card is used or the money person's credit card is used does not make the money person necessarily your client. The client is who signs that contract. Again, just because the money person pays doesn't mean the money person is your client. So having only recipients sign is one way to kind of get around disharmony between recipients and the money person. The second thing is that you can actually work into your contract a provision which is kind of like who has final say, who is point of contact for revisions, amendments, budgets, this type of thing. So the clause would be something like, even though money person is the client, wedding professional is obliged only to listen to person A, recipient A, for contractual matters. That's perfectly legitimate as well. Has to say that in the contract. Otherwise, again, you're at the mercy of the money person if that's the person that signed the contract. So again, having the recipient sign or working into the contract that you will listen to a particular person or persons only if everybody signs. Listening to a particular person only. These are ways to, from a contractual standpoint, from a legal standpoint, minimize the damage from disharmony between everyone involved in that event. So from a business standpoint, though, getting all these things ironed out at the beginning is extremely helpful as well. So I guess at the end of the day, you just have to, sometimes you're going to be playing referee, and you're going to be playing Dr. Phil, and you're going to be playing Uncle Phil, I guess, and you're going to be playing, because he mediated a lot of disputes. You're going to wear many hats, and to the extent the contract can protect you, that's great. But oftentimes it's just going to have to be your business acumen rather than the words on the contract. But again, the words in the contract can be extremely helpful. So this was a quick and dirty episode. I don't know if it's dirty. It's quick and clean. If you have suggestions for content for the podcast, shoot me an email, hit me up on Instagram. I really hope you're enjoying it. I really like making these. It's super fun to connect. It's better than writing a blog. I used to have a blog. I've given up on the blog for videos and podcasts. So much easier, so much fun. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this. And I guess with that, I will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Wedding Industry Law Podcast. This podcast is intended for general information only. Nothing in this podcast is intended to be legal advice. Do not rely on this podcast for your legal matter. Instead, consult an attorney in your area. Thanks, obrigada, até semana que vem.